My final question is, what is the outlook for private equity over the medium to long term? And if you could consider, obviously, we're in a high interest rate, high inflation environment at the moment. It's out of favour. How do you feel the medium to long term looks? I'd like to ask that question to Helen.
Thanks, Annabelle. Well, I would say that actually private equity thrives even more in a period of dislocation and disruption, because private equity is nimble, flexible, and is able to find investment opportunities that may not be obvious in other parts of sort of the financial investment universe. And one of the interesting statistics that I like to pull out is that actually private equity top quartile managers obviously outperform public markets in the good times, and in a bull market, the average outperformance of a top quartile private equity manager is 890 basis points. But in bear markets, in more difficult times, that outperformance of top quartile managers actually increases to 1,940. So that just sort of goes to prove the point that private equity can do even better in more difficult times. And I think if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
If you think about it, it does make a lot of sense, because what they're buying is cheaper. And then so they can, they get it at a good valuation, and then they go in and do all the hard work with the company. And then hopefully the environment is improved when the exit comes along. So, it does make sense that challenging conditions create opportunities for private equity.
And sorry, Annabelle, you can also use this as a change agent. So I think you find that in more difficult periods, change in some ways is easier to enact in these portfolio companies.
That makes a lot of sense. Colin, what's your medium to long-term outlook on private equity?
Okay, so I started working in private equity back in 2007. Since then, the industry has trebled in size, no matter what metric you look at, whether it's total fund commitments, assets under management, it's more or less tripled in size. It's also increased dramatically in sophistication. In terms of the ability of private equity firms to add value, sort of operate. It's really moved away from being about financial engineering. It's very focused on operational improvement. And I can see that trend extending, that increasing scale and sophistication. What we're seeing is that companies which historically might have been listed are now staying private for longer. And that, of course, increases the opportunity set for private equity. And of course, it's also an asset class which has demonstrated the ability to perform through cycles as well. So when I look at all of those factors, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, that sounds hopeful. Richard, what's your medium to long-term outlook?
Yeah, no, it'd be very similar. As Colin has said, the performance of private equity over the medium to long term historically has been very good. The amount of capital available from private fund managers to invest is higher than it's been in the past. I wouldn't expect there to be any major deterioration in outlook for private equity. I would expect it to continue to outperform. I would expect there to be some pockets that do better than others. I think the buyout side of the end of the spectrum will be probably stronger than some of the earlier stage venture or growth end of things that have been particularly hit by higher interest rates. But I would say generally, where there are the most opportunities, private equity can be nimble and can be flexible to follow those opportunities. And so, I would be pretty optimistic, to be honest with you, if you've got a reasonably long or medium term view that the outperformance of private equity ought to continue.
That's great to hear. It sounds to me like private investors need to consider, and obviously they have to consider that themselves, and if they have any concern, they should talk to a financial advisor, but they should consider perhaps a small allocation to private equity investment companies, because they're getting access to unquoted companies which they're not getting access to anywhere else in their portfolio. I'd like to thank our managers very much for joining us today. It's been great to hear their views on private equity investment companies and their investments. I'd like to emphasise that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Investment is definitely for the long term, and it's important to have a well-balanced portfolio. If you are in any doubt, you should talk to a financial advisor. Thanks so much for watching.